Welcome back to another episode of the Midlife Mavericks Podcast, where we empower men to reclaim their strength, energy, and purpose. Today, we're diving into a topic that is often overlooked, but crucial for your well-being: gut health. I'm thrilled to be joined by Lorraine Cussen, a seasoned functional medicine practitioner with over 20 years of experience. Lorraine has dedicated her career to helping individuals overcome digestive issues, women's health concerns, and more. Her journey into functional medicine was fueled by personal health challenges, leading her to become a passionate advocate for holistic well-being. In this episode, Lorraine and I explore the concept of leaky gut, what it is, how it develops, and its impact on men in midlife. We discuss the hidden culprits like stress, diet, and lifestyle factors that can compromise your gut health. Lorraine shares actionable strategies to heal your gut naturally, including dietary adjustments, effective supplements, and lifestyle modifications. If you've been experiencing unexpected fatigue, brain fog, or digestive discomfort, this conversation is a must listen. Your gut health plays a pivotal role in your overall health, and it's time to give it the attention it deserves. I'm glad to have you on the show, and I'm looking forward to our conversation today. We're going to dive into gut health and talk about leaky gut. But before we do, I'm going to pose a couple of questions to you. The first one is, if you and I were both boarding an aeroplane, where would that aeroplane be heading? Do you have a favorite holiday destination, or is there something on the bucket list that you would like to go and check out?
That is an interesting question, because I was just on an aeroplane on the weekend, but not to this destination. So I would the first place that comes into my mind is Mexico.
Oh, beautiful. I haven't been to Mexico yet, so I'll definitely come on that trip.
Get on your list. It's a beautiful country for so many reasons: people, culture, food, pace of life. Really very mañana, but hardworking. It's such a contrast there. So yeah, one of my favorite places. The other one that I'm actually very blessed this year to be for the first time really exploring is Scotland.
Oh, nice.
We're going over there in July, so I'm excited about that. So
very good. Yeah, I lived in the UK for
Mexico stretch.
Yeah, I'll come to Mexico, but I lived in the UK for 10 years. So I did get to Scotland, but mainly that was back in my days of running marathons, and I ran the Edinburgh Marathon up in Scotland. And I regret not going and seeing more of Scotland. I wish I'd got out and explored more of it.
So I'd have no guarantee that July is going to mean good weather, I hear.
No, there's no guarantee that it's going to be probably still going to be cold. So make sure you pack your warm clothes, that's for sure.
Good advice. Thank you.
That's it. Second part of that question. So if we're sitting on that plane together and we spark up a conversation, and I was to ask you about like your purpose and passion, what would you say that is?
I think, health has become a passion, and because it's a passion, I think it has started to feel like it has been my purpose. It wasn't quite where I thought I would end up, but I'm quite a few years on now, and I think it's because it's important for me personally that it's been something then I've felt enthusiastic about helping other people with, if they're interested in doing that. For me, the idea of not looking after our health first seems ridiculous almost, because we can certainly, I understand and appreciate the importance of making sure we look after our financial status or, home environment and priorities. But if we don't have our health, it's always been something that I have actually posed in the past when I've done a bit of public speaking and done group sessions and training, and, hands up those who have got good super, and there are lots of people very proud that they're doing that investment for their future. And then I say, hands up those who are looking after their health to make sure you're actually going to be here. That. And it can be quite a moment for people to think about, well, how much am I looking after it? Yeah, so for me, it's always been at front and centre, even in tough times. I haven't really, it's like the one unnegotiables.
Yeah, beautiful.
looking after wealth, making sure you're doing all the things that you need to do. So, and that's sort of become my purpose in life, I think. And it is great to have a purpose, of course. That's part of health. That's part of good health for us all to feel like we've got a purpose. So the longer I've done it, the more I think I've become passionate about it. And now it's a point where it doesn't feel like a burning urgency that I have to go and spread the word, but I am very encouraging and motivated when people come and sit with me and talk about wanting to change things and make changes and improve where they're at. And I'm like 100% there for them.
Yeah, excellent. I like that message. Just out of curiosity, like you say, health's always been important. Is there a point in your life where the value of health sort of came to the top as a priority, or has that always been for as long as you can remember?
I think it was possibly around my mid-30s. Because I'm in my 60s now. And so that before that, I'd been blessed with a reasonably good genetic kind of predisposition. And so I sort of, I wasn't overly health conscious in my 20s, first to admit that. Yet I was lucky. My body got away with it and coped with it. But I think as you keep doing that, inevitably it does catch up. And so around my 30s, I was traveling in my 20s in Morocco, and I got a very nasty gut infection. And it was after that I think my body started to talk to me and go, excuse me, that's not working for us. And like most or a lot of people, we can ignore all of those messages, and eventually then we end up, the body just gets louder and the signals get louder and the symptoms get louder. And so I actually went to see a naturopath. I think it was a naturopath in my early 30s or mid-20s. And I just came away from that appointment thinking, oh, that's a no-brainer. That makes so much more sense to consider looking at causes of things, dealing with the health as a holistic thing, and trying to support and nourish your body rather than suppress symptoms. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%, mate. And we're going to dive into a lot of that. I think it's a very powerful message to sort of talk about. It's funny, isn't it? I think a lot of us we take our health for granted until maybe something goes wrong, like having, a gut issue, a parasite, leaky gut, which we're going to go into, all those sort of things. And I think it's only when the pain of having, that illness or the pain of what's happening to the body is more uncomfortable than making the change that we actually start to step into the idea of like, well, I've really got to address this. And if I don't address this, what's going to happen in the future? And I think midlife is that sort of turning point for a lot of us. I know it was for me too. It was sort of mid-30s for me, where I've worked in health and fitness since I was late 20s, but it's just like it went to the new level when my health started to suffer. It went beyond just the exercise and training and nutrition and going in deeper. And that's when I started to learn a lot more about functional medicine as well. And it really opened my eyes to, I suppose, a better path than what we're seeing with conventional medicine and suppressing, the symptoms, like you say. So let's dive in. Let's talk a little bit about leaky gut. I'm curious to hear more. Being a sufferer in the past of leaky gut myself, which I'm more than happy to share that story. But just out of curiosity, let's maybe start with what is leaky gut, Lorraine?
Okay. So leaky gut it's sometimes talked about as a syndrome rather than a condition. And I think there's some misconceptions sometimes around that there's this leaky gut syndrome. It's like a hypothetical and sometimes medically unrecognized condition. I think it is changing. I was listening to Mark Hyman recently, who's one of the founders of functional medicine, and he was saying in his world, he's noticing his medical colleagues are starting to be a little, like 30 years ago, they were going, what are you talking about? It's just a load of rubbish. But he said he's noticing that's sort of changing slowly. But from a scientific perspective, it's really about an increased intestinal permeability. So it mostly applies to the small intestine in our gastrointestinal tract, and we have one layer of epithelial cells. So it's not a lot. It's a very thin membrane that is vulnerable, and it's got a huge job. This is the area of the digestive tract that's, the length of tennis court if you stretch it out. It's where we're supposed to absorb lots of great nutrients, break down food, etc., and only really have a bit of a one-way door, swing door that's absorbing rather than and filtering. So just the role of the small intestine is really to manage of what we need to absorb and don't take in what we don't want. And then the other area, so compared to the colon has two layers there, a lot thicker and more protected, but everything's got to get through the small intestine before it gets down into that area in the colon. So these cells, these what they call epithelial cells, some people, I hear lots of different analogies or descriptions. It's like a net. It's like a coffee filter. It's like, a cloth that's very solid and has some permeability to it, but we don't want too much. And once we get certain things that we'll start to, and we'll talk about that, I'm sure, impair that integrity of that barrier, we start to get a bit like holes in the net, and or the tight junctions that are supposedly there filtering things and making them work as they should start to become compromised. And, it's interesting because that area of the gastrointestinal tract is regenerated, that lining, about every 5 days. So, and it's there to protect our body and microbial invasion. So things like when we get food poisoning and certain bacteria, viruses, gastrointestinal viruses, toxins, things like that we are all exposed to all the time now. That's really a first line of defense in there. And a lot of our immune system lives there and is responsible for managing all of that.
Yeah, beautiful.
So as we get bombarded with things like food particles, bacteria, viruses, etc., we'll talk about again some of the other things that might cause a leaky gut, that really it just sort of damages that protective barrier, and the immune system can start to get very overregulated and concerned about it and starts to react a lot. So then you've got a whole sequelae of events that can start to take place with our health once that first barrier, if I think of it like a front line of soldiers, and if you start to shoot holes in that front line, you're going to end up with problems inside or down the back. So
yeah, nice one. I like the analogy of the net, and I like the analogy of the coffee filter. I think people can really visualize that and sort of see that, the layer of the intestine is meant to be permeable. Like we're actually passing nutrients from the food we eat into our body through that filter. And if the holes in that filter become too large, well, then obviously we start to get bigger particles, or like you say, we create space for bacteria or other pathogens to get into our bloodstream. Which obviously can seem like, that's a bit alerting, like what's going on there. And it must be so important. Like you say, if the body's turning over those cells and recreating those cells every 5 days, like it's obviously important for that structure to be intact. Just at the rate of energy we must put to that process of rebuilding those cells all the time. I've read this thing and it really stood out to me where they talk about the gut and they say, okay, so from our mouth and the pipe that goes down to our stomach and through our intestines and all the way to our anus, well, that's actually outside of our body because we put food in there and water in there and everything goes in there, but it's got to get absorbed into the body. So it's like this tube or this big plastic bag that's actually outside our body. And until we start to digest that food or break apart, all those minerals and vitamins to digest them, they're not in our body just yet, which is a nice little analogy and sort of plays in your mind a little bit. How's that outside my body? But yeah, I like that analogy. Let's explore a little bit more. So we've got this idea of the leaky gut and the permeability of the gut. what are some of the things that might cause leaky gut?
The first front line for me is always going to be, food and beverages or liquids. So whatever we're ingesting, we can certainly think about that as a trigger or a support of keeping it healthy. So when we're eating food that's good for us, healthy for us, nourishing for us, we can assume that that's conducive to the gastrointestinal tract staying nice and healthy, and that barrier being supported and nourished, and therefore everything's going swimmingly and doing their job. The things that might change that and aggravate that are certainly going to be dietary related, and things in our diet that are low in fibre, high in sugar, ultra-processed foods, things that have got additives, emulsifiers, artificial sweeteners, colourings, preservatives, all those chemicals are not nourishing or nutritional for that particular area of the gastrointestinal tract. And for some people, that can then roll on to things like gluten and dairy and so on. But if we go back to just keeping it very simple and saying what works well in dietary forms, it's whole foods. What doesn't bode so well, ultra-processed foods. That would keep it kind of very simple. And as I talk to patients, I say, if you're taking it out of a packet, you probably need to consider really what's in it and be reading the ingredients. And it's always great to see their lights come on when they come back the next time and said, oh my God, I was just reading what's on that, and taking a lot of that stuff out of their cupboard and just bringing in fresh produce. So they're the sort of primary things. The next are the things that can certainly challenge or compromise or inflame that area, things like smoking. Smoking, of course, is, from how long I've been around, smoking was kind of not a big deal when I was young and growing up. To this day and age, it's definitely got a whole different place in society's habits, but there are still people that are doing it. And then you've got the other alternative is things like vaping and all of the chemicals that come with that. So we know that in the fact that the immune system sitting there going, well, what is this? Yeah. And what am I supposed to do about it? It's going to have a reaction. Now, the other problem with smoking and things like that is that we are changing the pH in the digestive tract as well. So now you've got bicarb and other things that are going to normally buffer and protect being compromised by those habits. The progress of peptic ulcers and inflammation or impacts on that mucosal lining, the acidity of the gastrointestinal, particularly the stomach, that's really vulnerable. And then it becomes vulnerable to other infections in there, like the Helicobacter pylori infection, when you change the pH in a stomach. Alcohol, it's another one. It's really challenging for that one to come into the conversation. And it's incredible how much people are sometimes attached to their choices of particularly alcohol. And alcohol consumption is one of those conversations that I'm very happy to have with people, but they're not always very happy to have it with me. So we have to manage that a little bit delicately. The question that I love that comes from some patients is, well, how much is too much? What's the safe level? Is there a safe level? And I say, unfortunately, these days, the research is saying there is no safe level. So that's very hard for some people to really get their head around, because there are people who will say, oh, look, I don't think I need it. I'm happy to give it up. But then when the time comes to actually do it, they struggle a bit more than they realise they would. And then there are other folks who will say, I don't want to give it up altogether. I want to be able to still have it. So we can explore then, well, what's the attachment to that? But alcohol first of all, how does it happen? Alcohol disrupts microbiota. So all of the microbiome that we've got going on in our digestive tract, and it's everywhere from our mouth through to the anus, it's also all over our body with bugs everywhere, they're going to get disrupted, absolutely, and compromised. And the ecosystem that's going on in there is going to start to change because you're changing the pH in there when you're drinking alcohol, and therefore you're going to get opportunistic pathogens or microbes that are going to start to overgrow and say, great, we love this, let's keep going. And then you'll get others that are compromised and can't survive. So regular consumption of alcohol is not only going to, and as soon as those microbes are compromised in their ecosystem, now you've got an environment that's vulnerable to having an intestinal barrier that's now compromised because they're so protective.
Yeah.
And we can talk about microbiota a bit more. It's irritating to the stomach lining as well, alcohol. So people who overdrink, they end up with things like stomach ulcers or gastritis. It slows down stomach emptying. So that's going to cause a whole lot of problems down the track if we're not getting our food moving through the gastrointestinal tract at a good pace or transit time.
Yep.
So it puts a strain on the liver.
Yeah.
And, you know, if we think about the gastrointestinal tract, I always think of it as a bit like either a factory production line or a train line. If one of those stations along the line isn't doing the job it's designed to do, it's going to put a heavier burden on other areas. So if we've changed the pH or the stomach acid adequacy, for example, you now have food that's not digested properly, and then you've got that entering into the small intestine, and you're putting food into that area. That department's going, I thought this was going to be a little bit more broken down before it ended up in here. And you've got digestive enzymes that are coming from the pancreas and the liver, and those things are getting a heavier job than what they should have or have been designed to cope with. And now we've got potential overload or compromised digestion ability. That's not what the small intestine is designed to do. The stomach was supposed to have done that job with its stomach acid, but it didn't get to do that because it didn't have enough because the alcohol's changed that story. So it's often a flow-on effect, a ripple effect of things as much as what is the irritant to that lining actually doing. And it definitely is an irritant.
Definitely. It's interesting. There's a couple of good points that you make there. One is like, I've read in the research that when researchers want to do experiments around leaky gut, the way that they make mice have leaky gut is they just give them high volumes of alcohol in a short period of time, and it initially just causes leaky gut. They also do it with other chemicals, but that's one of the processes. So I think alcohol is definitely high on the list of like, yeah, it can cause that gut permeability. But the other thing I hear you saying, it sounds really uncommon. It's interesting to hear because I haven't really thought about it too much before. Is like that transit time of food. So when we talk about, okay, the pH level dropping and the stomach acids dropping, that's going to affect transit time. We talk about ultra processed food and maybe things that aren't so digestible getting stuck in our gut and slowing it down. And that analogy of the train station is quite good. So it's like if everything's sort of building up in there over time, that's got the potential to cause gut issues, such as obviously leaky gut being one of those, which is interesting because the same sort of happens with SIBO, which is that small intestine bacterial overgrowth. If we start to slow down transit time and we end up with the wrong foods or the undigested food in the small intestine, and then that bacteria overgrowth that starts to happen from that as well. So a lot of gut issues coming from, like you say, the food that we're putting into the system and whether our body can digest and absorb that food at the rate it needs to, or whether it's just starting to clog up the pathway and then cause these other issues. I'm curious about stress. Like, what are your thoughts around stress and how that affects the gut? And is stress something that could also be the cause of leaky gut, do you feel?
Yeah, definitely. So we talk about some of the fundamental pillars of health, and chronic stress, poor sleep, lack of exercise, traumatic brain injury, which often is not talked about. We can, elaborate on that a bit more. all of those things are going to have a connection to how the gastrointestinal tract functions. And with chronic stress, I'm always blown away to review this area with patients, because in the design of human bodies, it was a great design about 10,000 years ago when we were fighting tigers and all of that sort of story, when we talk about the fight and flight. The thing that happens with stress in that moment of sympathetic nervous system response, the kind of physiology that goes on is where I think we sort of make that connection. So the mechanism is absolutely designed that if I'm in a place of a stressful occasion, the gastrointestinal tract or consuming food is not the priority for the body. And we're still operating the same way. We haven't evolved in all of those 10,000 years. Our bodies are still responding in the same way, because evolution takes a long time. So we have things that occur like a reduction of stomach acid, sometimes a speeding up of transit, sometimes a slowing down. And people who have felt nervous, anxious, butterflies in the tummy will know what that means, and that, they've either had to rush to the toilet or they realise they haven't been for 3 days because they've been so tense and stressed. You have a reduction of digestive enzymes that goes on. You have a change of insulin sensitivity. You have a lot of the blood circulation and flow being redirected to the arms and legs. So now you've also got a slowing down of that whole function in the gastrointestinal tract. Chronic stress, when we're a lot more in that sympathetic nervous system place, rather than the rest and digest parasympathetic nervous system, is going to have that flow-on effect into that, compromising again that intestinal barrier, because you've just changed all of the mechanisms of what's supposed to happen when we're digesting food. How many people eat as they're walking down the road, or, preparing something, or at their desk, or when they're not even really focusing on the whole process that should go on around? And that then is going to definitely compromise and potentially end up with the vulnerability of that intestinal permeability becoming worse.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think that's what caused my leaky gut initially. And at the time, I was training and competing in endurance sports, so marathons and triathlons and Ironman events. And it was the overtraining, like just constantly smashing myself with, long distance runs, swims and cycles, backed up by, long days at work, being a personal trainer, up early, there late at night, and always rushing, not sitting to eat my food, just throwing something in before the next client or whatever was happening. And then just slowly I started to notice the issue of, just like having to go to the toilet, like, whatever I'd eat would virtually just go straight through me. And I couldn't keep, food in my stomach, and it started to affect my sleep, started to affect my recovery, always anxious. All these things were starting to happen. And I was just like, what's going on? And I couldn't, bring the dots together initially. And more foods started to become like a food sensitivity. Like there were certain foods that I could pick out. Let's say eggs. If I ate eggs that just wanted me to go straight to the bathroom, they'd just go straight through me. So I had to start avoiding certain foods just because it would make things worse. Protein shakes, stuff like that would just set me off. And it wasn't until, I started to piece it together and start to understand the gut that I was like, okay, I've definitely got leaky gut, and now I've got to start to focus on healing it. So that was a little bit my story, and I'll talk more about it as we go through this.
I think it's great that you've even plopped it, because it is a hard one for people to link. And, we talk a lot about stress and how it impacts health in functional medicine. And when we try to link that to gastrointestinal, there are some folks who don't, very luckily, have any overt symptoms of gastrointestinal unwellness. But I can absolutely link it back to say you're on borrowed time. It just because you're not feeling that symptom doesn't mean that there isn't, your body's obviously doing a great job right now. It's managing the story, but it won't last. because we know that the mechanisms of pathophysiology and physiology will start to change all those things that I was saying, reducing blood flow, reducing enzymes. We're also going to put a stress on the mucosal lining directly, so reducing some of the mucus lining that goes along that mucosal membrane and some of the immune system that goes on in there. So, it's absolutely influenced by, in the same way that exercise is influenced potentially positively for it, but potentially also negatively if it's overdone, particularly if the exercise is being done at a high performance level when a person's nervous system is not nourished. You've now
100%.
header there.
Yeah, I read that a lot of athletes, like definitely triathletes, like there are so many professional triathletes that have leaky gut 100%. Like it's just the amount of training that they put themselves through and probably the traditional high carb diets that they eat that it causes that. But I've also read high level CrossFit athletes, high level just about from any sport that are just overtraining and not nourishing their gut and maybe not spending enough time in that parasympathetic nervous system, allowing that to recover. Like a lot of them are suffering from leaky gut or definitely leaky gut syndromes. And it's interesting, isn't it? We think exercise is good for us and maybe we put elite athletes up there as like healthy and fit people. But we start to see that like over exercise and too much of that physical stress on the body can definitely have downstream effects. And I also think sometimes we think, okay, eggs are a healthy food and there are a lot of great healthy foods out there. But just because they're healthy at the time where you've got leaky gut, they might be foods that you have to remove to give the gut a chance to heal. Because, we can point the finger at processed foods and seed oils and refined sugars and these things, and they're definitely bad for the gut. But also sometimes these foods that are quite healthy can be causing lots of different symptoms. And that's, I suppose, the next part I want to talk about. What are some of the symptoms? What are the things people are going to sort of see or feel if they've sort of got leaky gut? And I suppose it's a tough one because there's a lot of underlying gut issues we could have that might not be leaky gut that'll have similar symptoms. But what sort of things are we going to see?
So as you said, sometimes it can be a gut symptom, but other times it's not a gut symptom. It's an autoimmune disease.
Yeah.
So if we think about the protection, we're talking about this barrier is there sort of as a first line of defense and trying to stay, be very vigilant about what gets into our body, what gets leaked through to our bloodstream versus what doesn't. And if you've got, say, for example, you've got, there are a whole lot of conditions that can develop. And you alluded to one of them before, is certainly the small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, SIBO. The other one is SIFO, small intestinal fungal overgrowth. There are things that can compromise someone's digestion because they originally had food poisoning or gastro. And so microbes like Salmonella and E. coli, Klebsiella, these are things that can already set up our predisposition or our causes. If we go back, why did I get in the first place? And we're very obsessed with cause in functional medicine. Maybe I've had a history of using non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, so ibuprofen, things like that have always been recommended and pretty well known that they do compromise the environment, particularly the stomach and the stomach lining. And it's always been suggested, make sure you have it with food, but people just, life happens. And then you've got things like proton pump inhibitors, people that are using medications to stop or reduce stomach acid because they're having terrible heartburn and reflux. Antibiotics. A lot of people, most people think of antibiotics compromising their microbiome in the large intestine, but they don't think about it necessarily having an impact on the whole gastrointestinal tract. And then we've got sufficiency of bile acids and things like that. So those can be the predisposition before it. And then what we have in regards to symptoms is those things may have caused my digestive or intestinal permeability is to be compromised. The barrier is not doing, it's quite holy, we've got lots of holes in it now. So we've got things, proteins and bacteria and toxins that are leaking through there, getting it to the bloodstream. The immune system's attacking that or seeing that and responding to that and causing autoimmune diseases. So whilst we don't always I mean, I definitely stand on the shoulders of other practitioners, and one of them is a wonderful practitioner, Jason Horolak, and he talks a bit about how in his clinical experiences, sometimes he tests people for intestinal permeability or leaky gut, and they don't have one. And other times he tests them and they definitely do. Or sometimes he's not sure that they are presenting with a condition that looks like. So we're talking about symptoms was your question.
Yeah.
And he finds out that they do have one when he didn't predict that they would. And they've just sort of done the testing to be thorough.
Mm.
So the symptom itself, I mean, the obvious things that people tend to think about are going to be things like I've got bloating, I've got gas, I've got lots of cramping, maybe a nauseous feeling, heartburn, reflux, indigestion, abdominal distension or pain or discomfort. But they don't, someone can have all of that and not have leaky gut. And the same in the reverse. You know, full disclosure, there was a moment there where I was working in a SIBO testing lab as a SIBO lab technician, and there was a free test kit going. It was about to expire, one of the substrates in the test kit. Someone said, do you know, does anyone want to do it? And I said, yeah, I'll do it. And I'd been quite pious about my testing experience and all these people that, you know, that had all of these positive results and so on. Had no symptoms. I just wanted to do it for the experience. Huge spikes of fermentation. So this is why I say it's not always so easy to just be conclusive about, and that's where I think the investigation of stuff is good. But the other things that people can present with, again, that are not sort of sounding directly like a potential digestive problem are things like eczema or rashes. Obesity is a problem, headaches, the food sensitivity you talked about, mental health concerns. So we know that this is all called the second brain. You know, we've got the vagus nerve that's connected to the enteric nervous system that's all around the gastrointestinal. So they can be pretty much everything and anything you could present with. And from a functional medicine point of view, we're not going to go to that as a diagnosis, but we're definitely going to investigate and explore, well, what are the chances of this being part of the story that might be driving whatever the person is presenting with.
Yeah, excellent. It's so powerful, isn't it? Like the gut is just connected to every system in the body, and you can have underlying issues with the gut. And like you say, we're not getting gut symptoms, but the eczema thing or headaches or the fatigue or, you know, all those things that come along with it. And you're just like, well, what's going on? And it's hard to put it back there. Now that you mentioned like the skin stuff, I remember having like athlete's foot at the time and just thinking, oh, well, that must be like I'm always in shoes and I'm always running and cycling and it's the sweat and stuff. But when I fixed my gut, all that went away. And I reckon that was related to my leaky gut as well, like the rash and stuff that I'd get on my foot every now and again. And you're just like thinking that I've got to use these creams and ointments, which are treating the symptom, but they're not actually addressing the underlying cause, which was obviously causing the problem. And it's fascinating because it's so hard, like you say, it's so hard to diagnose. You could have leaky gut and have all these symptoms that are pointing towards it, or maybe you're unaware that you've even got leaky gut, but it's causing downstream effects in other parts of the body. And yeah, it's just fascinating, isn't it? How different bodies react in a different way when we're doing this. Now, if you were to go,
and that's a really good point there, Stretch, because it is different for everybody. And what someone's tolerance is compared to the person said, you can have 5 people sitting in the room, all with exactly the same symptom and all different causes or reasons for it, and then different approaches to how to resolve it.
Yeah. I suppose that's why it's so important to sort of know the person's history. Like when you look back at health history, and if they've been on a lot of antibiotics, or if they take a lot of pain-killing drugs, the NSAIDs, or if they've had, you know, gut bacteria, food poisoning, all these sort of things, like say that could be a precursor to them having underlying gut issues and point you in the direction of like, okay, we should do some testing there just to sort of see if there have been some lasting, effects of that. And I think that's one of the best things about functional medicine. Like when I've worked with functional medicine doctors or integrative doctors or practitioners, it's always been, okay, well, what's the history? Talk to me about your health history so I can start to map together a bit of a piece of, you know, your journey, your individual journey, where you're at, and then we can sort of start to explore from there. Whereas our conventional medicine doctors, you go to there and it's just like, okay, what are your symptoms? Okay, here's your drug, or here's whatever. This is what you need to do. And that's sort of what I want to focus on a little bit next, because we can talk about conventional medicine and functional medicine. If you go to a conventional medicine doctor and you've got these symptoms, chances are they're going to say, well, you've got IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, or something like that. Or they're not even going to consider SIBO, leaky gut, all these things, because I think you mentioned it before, there's been this sort of big pushback of like, this doesn't exist. It's, it's not heard of in the medical literature. It's just not fact. So a little bit about like, why do you think conventional medicine hasn't caught up to the fact of these things in the gut? And I suppose it's just one of those things. It's challenging, isn't it? We a lot of people put a lot of faith in our medical system, but yet maybe the answers they're getting aren't deep enough.
I think, first of all, one of the things is that a lot of research has been done on animals, in particular mice. And so there are a few well-designed human trials, clinical trials that have gone on in relationship to this story and this subject. And so the conclusion then tends to lean more towards a causation versus correlation. And the allopathic medical community, generally, they kind of view intestinal permeability as a potential component of other recognised disorders rather than a standalone syndrome. And I get that because I tend to agree with that, actually. But the thing, I guess, is that, we have to respect what they offer in the world that they work. Yeah. And in the sense of what can they offer as some sort of resolution or treatment protocol, it's not really their wheelhouse. And so having the diagnosis of IBS is really just saying you've got an irritable bowel. Yep. And a person goes, I kind of knew that before I came here. That's why I came here. So, but what have they got in their tool bag to try to offer? Now, some not being, some are fabulous. They're terribly time constrained as well. They have 5 minutes with people sometimes. And what are you going to be able to say beyond, perhaps you could start exercising and eat a bit healthier? That's about as much as, and it doesn't really, just saying that doesn't mean a person's going to do it. Although I'm sure there are some patients who walk away from that appointment and go, wow, the doctor's prescription was that I should eat better and exercise. Yeah. I'll better do that then and take that on. And if that's the outcome and that's the result, fabulous. But it doesn't always pan out that way.
Yeah.
So I think the skepticism is probably because a lot of the diagnosis or the exploration of it is functional medicine and functional medical testing and the choices that we have. And rather than more of a physical assessment like a gastroscopy or a colonoscopy, that is great as a ruling out, but an actual assessment of what's happening in the ecosystem, the bacteria, the digestive enzyme function, the adequacy of stomach acid, things like that, they're not going to be identified. Even a small intestinal bacterial overgrowth is not going to be identified by a gastroscopy or colonoscopy. Microbiome that is overgrown or dysbiotic in its ecosystem is not going to be identified in a colonoscopy. So that's the sort of area that's great when you're talking to someone about risk of colon cancer and stuff. But in this world and the idea of intestinal permeability, it's not going to come through that kind of investigation. So I think that's part of the trap for them, is that they don't really, it's not where they're working in there. And gaps in tight junctions are not going to be assessed just through gastroscopy. I mean, biopsies and things can help. They can certainly identify damage to villi and ulceration and stuff like that, but it's not going to help in this functional testing method, and that's what we're using of course, all the time in functional medicine.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, it's a good thing to know because I have a lot of clients that come to me, or a lot of people will talk to me via social media and stuff about gut health because I'm always talking about it. And they'll go, "Oh, what probiotic should I take?" Or, XYZ, because they just think that it's a simple solution and there's a one-size-fits-all solution. Or, you start to mention something like SIBO or leaky gut, and they go, "Oh, I'll go and talk to my doctor about that." And I'm like, if you mention that to your doctor, they're probably going to look at you funny and think you don't know what you're talking about because they don't know anything about that. And they're not the best person to see. And then they're like, "Oh, who should I see?" I'm like, "Well, you need to see a functional medicine practitioner because, to be honest, they're going to look at root cause. And they're the ones that are going to do the actual testing that's going to help you probably uncover what it is because gut issues are complicated. And I can't just say, "Oh, yeah, you've definitely got leaky gut," or "Yes, you've definitely got SIBO," or "You should take a probiotic," or "You shouldn't." Like, you need to, obviously dive in and do some testing so that you actually understand what's going wrong, because taking the wrong thing and continuing to eat the wrong food and continuing to drink alcohol and all these sort of things could just spiral you down and make things worse, not make things better. It's like my scenario of eating eggs. Eggs are a good food, but I couldn't eat them at the time. And me continuing to eat eggs wasn't going to help my gut in that sense. I do want to go in and talk a little bit more about the testing. But before we do, if I ignore something like leaky gut, what are the long-term impacts of not taking action and not taking care of that gut lining, do you think?
Just got a list of A to Z, really. Really, there isn't almost anything that you can't link to. And I think that was kind of really when the penny dropped for me when I started working in the SIBO lab. Because I knew a little bit about SIBO before I started working there, but I just, thought, "Oh, yeah, what else is there to know?" And the 3.5 years there, so I had a lovely opportunity to just dive deep dive. And at one point, I remember going, "Okay, so if all this is going on, what is the end game? Why is this a problem in the long term if it gets left undiagnosed and untreated?" And the answer was that it will compromise intestinal permeability. Okay. And then there is a list on a wonderful practitioner who practices kind of primarily with SIBO patients in America, Dr. Alison Seebecker. And on her website, she has a terrific link that's titled Associated Diseases. And it is A to Z.
Yes.
It is mind-blowing. And SIBO is not a new condition. I mean, that was being researched around in the last, the 1960s, I think it was, that it started, or 1970s. But it's really come to the fore in the last couple of decades. So if we think about intestinal permeability and say, well, what diseases can be caused or associated with, then I would say it's pretty much anything you could think of, really. You could come back to that as a consideration. Now, that doesn't mean that it's always that way. Sometimes you can have that issue like hypothyroidism. Doesn't mean you've got hypothyroidism because you've got a leaky gut. It might be, though, that because of the hypothyroidism you develop a leaky gut because you've got slow gut motility in that condition, or it could be the other way around. And this is why the investigational stuff is kind of fundamental. And we really think of ourselves all the time as detectives trying to go through that investigation. I think, if we compare it, I was going to go off on a tangent, then I won't do that. Well, wait till you actually ask me a question, Stretch.
No, it's all good. You did. It's excellent. I think when you step back and you really think about it, like you go, okay, well, our body needs resources. We're turning over our cells all the time. We need our vitamins, our minerals, our amino acids, our healthy fats. We could go through the list of everything our body needs, all that nutrients. Now, if we can't get that into our body, then our body's going to start to shut down. It's not going to have the resources that it needs to run optimally. And that's going to cause, downstream impacts. And it's not going to be one of those things where it just happens overnight. It's like death by paper cuts. It's just again and again and again, we're starting to cut these nutrients back because the gut now can't digest and absorb those nutrients correctly. It's not breaking it down the way it should. And that just exposes us to, I suppose, a lot of inflammation because we're leaking, larger proteins and different food into our gut and bacteria into our bloodstream. and that's pro-inflammatory. So now we're walking around in this inflamed state and we're nutrient deficient because the gut's not absorbing this stuff. And we can sort of see how that just sets us up for so many diseases or so many things that can affect us in the future if it goes unmanaged and undetected. Would you agree?
And I think, the thing that I'm always, and that this has just solidified in my belief over the years, is that the body has an incredible capacity to heal itself. And that was suggested to me in the beginning of my education. And I thought, well, that sounds like a bit of a stretch. But I absolutely believe it now, providing we give it the right ingredients.
Yeah.
And if we give it the good food, the good sleep, the good exercise, all those things, the stress management, those pillars, I'm sure most people can relate to an experience of scratching or having a wound on their skin. And we might put a balm on it, or we might put a bandage on it or something. But what we see most of the time is the body doing its own job of healing. The blood flow, the inflammation, the redness, the heat, the soreness, that is the body jumping into action. And I just love that stuff, to watch that happen. And if you've got a 2-year-old now, you would see it with kids. It's mind-blowing because, the vitality in children, most children, if they're lucky, their healing and wounding can happen overnight.
Yeah.
They have a night's sleep and that little scratch or wound is half healed the next morning. The bodies are amazing, but if we don't give it that, we don't have the right nutrients. As you say, if there's all of this kind of attack that's going on internally and reactivity of the way the body's designed to react is be inflamed. That's what it's doing. It's trying to do a good job, recover, but it can only do it for so long. And then after a while, if you've got that happening, you've now compromised your body's ability to absorb the good nutrients out of the food that you're eating, and then you're inefficient.
Yeah. The downward spiral, mate, definitely.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's jump a little bit into testing now. Okay, so let's say, you've got a client and maybe they've got symptoms of leaky gut, maybe they haven't, but through their history and that conversation about their health, maybe they've had, food poisoning on issue before, and you want to look at, okay, I want to write off the fact that you haven't got leaky gut. How can I test? What are we going to do?
Great question. And there seems to be a little bit of not contention, but differing opinions in this. There are some practitioners I know that will make some assumptions, and that might have come from doing a microbiome test, from getting a positive SIBO test result. But my learning and my way of what I've seen and what I now trust is absolutely urine testing when it comes to intestinal permeability. That's the only test that I would trust has given us a good reflection of a person's status. So it's a 6-hour test, the urine collection test. You do that at home. And it's going, when someone's doing the testing, at the beginning of the testing, they think there's very limited amount of fluid, like a bit of water they can have over that 6-hour timeline where they're collecting urine for 6 hours. So you might get up at 8 o'clock in the morning and you're going to do it till 2 o'clock. And you just basically, every time you need to go to the bathroom, you're collecting that urine sample. But at the beginning of the test, you're consuming 2 substrates, lactulose and mannitol. And the test works on the principle that the small molecules of mannitol are readily absorbed by the intestinal villi in the small intestine, whilst the larger molecules, the lactulose, they're disaccharides, are not. So these water-soluble, they're non-metabolized sugars, so we don't absorb them and metabolize them per se, but they're penetrating the intestinal tract. And if they're appearing in urine in certain numbers excreted through urine, we know then that we do have some permeability there.
Yeah.
That's the one for me. I really don't go on anything else as an absolute confirmation. I can certainly suspect or say, look, it's probable, but I don't love people coming in and saying, I think I've got leaky gut syndrome for a start.
Yeah.
It's not a syndrome. And I just go, okay, well, that's interesting and it's very feasible, could be associated. But if you really want to investigate this, along the time, sometimes we also, in treatment protocols that we do, depending on what the original testing is that we do, we might include things that are going to heal that as an assumption. We can talk about those as we go.
Yeah, definitely. That's a good thing to have a chat about, because I'm curious about like the leaky gut and obviously the treatment or how we go about fixing leaky gut. But I also think it's interesting to talk about the process of testing. Like you say, we can make the assumption that we have got leaky gut. We could have symptoms. We could not have symptoms. But I suppose being able to do a test like that urine test and get a little bit more data back that goes, okay, well, maybe you do have leaky gut and we need to address that. I always find that sort of stuff helpful. One of the tests I used to do a lot with my personal training clients, one of the first things we do is just like a food sensitivity test. And the only reason for that, it was cheap. And then they got back a report that had showed them which foods they might have a sensitivity to. But when they got back that information, like, this is what it's telling me. It tells me that you've got a gluten sensitivity, or right now you can't eat eggs and this, that, the other. And the clients who did that, they seemed to be able to change their habits a lot easier because they had some sort of data to back it up. Whereas the clients who didn't do that, when you try to talk to them about gluten sensitivity, you try to talk to them about, how food can affect us, I think a lot of that would just fly over their head. But when we actually got some data that says, look, you could have leaky gut, I think people are more likely to step into the arena and make changes with their health. And hopefully
it's
look
quite
at, okay.
compelling, I think, for people.
Yeah.
The evidence
exactly.
there.
Yeah.
It's sort of undeniable then. Yeah.
So if I've got leaky gut, what are the next steps? Can we fix leaky gut? And what sort of recommendations would you be giving to clients that you find, have results pointing to leaky gut from that testing?
So you can, I believe you can, but again, we're going to talk about how, long does it last? Do we fix it once and then we're fixed? Or is it something that we have to be mindful of? And my answer is the latter. We have to be aware that, first of all, we're going to talk about the cause. How did this happen in the first place? And if we've got that fairly clear, then I think it's helpful for people to then go forward and do a prevention on relapse. Because they go, okay, well, I was drinking a lot of alcohol at that time, or I was over-exercising, or I wasn't, I was thinking about 27,000 things while I was eating food and not concentrating on the food. So I think having that investigation of cause is really important in the treatment, and minimising those potential triggers for it to happen again is really, really significant for me in working as a practitioner to, again, why are we so obsessed with cause in functional medicine? Because it's certainly about diagnosis, identification, treatment, recovery, but it's also about relapse and making sure that people have got a good sort of toolkit, I guess, of their own that they can go for, that they know if their sleep gets off the boil, they know if things get into that they're going to be vulnerable. So all of that is absolutely part of our treatment protocol and encompassed. And then there are other things like, of course, looking at the diet. And as you say, food sensitivity, if the immune system's reacting and we've got identification of certain foods, avoiding those foods for a period of time, 6 to 8 weeks, and giving the immune system time to calm down. And at the same time, we can also be looking at potential supplement regimes that might improve and start to heal that area. But sometimes, I've always been of the mind of, I've got healing tools here, but what's the aggravator in the first place?
Yes.
So I keep aggravating that.
Yes.
How much chance have those tools got to actually do their job? Sure, they'll do something, but you're sort of fighting a tidal wave there if you keep aggravating. So this is where it's the combination of, these are the modifications that, whether it's dietary, lifestyle, that we need to, and if people most people do want to feel better yesterday, I just say, how quickly do you want to start to feel better? If you want to start to feel better quicker rather than later, having said all of that, I'm also respectful of people's capacity. So if they say, it's too much, I can't do all of that at once, that's totally understandable and fine. And then would try and pace it for there, because there's no point setting someone up to fail and then a week later they've gone hardcore with 20 different changes in their life and then they chuck a lot of it the next week. So I think, it's all of that navigation that we have to help people and support them with, and we do. So, and then in the story of supplements, I feel really blessed that we've got so many things. We've got things like glutamine, that is one of the biggest amino acids that we've seen a lot of research on, that is responsible or helpful for healing that intestinal permeability in that gut lining. The doses of it is quite high. That comes up in research. It's up around 15 to 20 grams a day. Yeah. And I think that's good for people to know, because many, many products provide 2 grams in a scoop or a serve. And not saying don't do it, but it's probably going to be ambitious to assume that's going to have the kind of outcome or the effect that you want it to do. So being aware of what dosage ranges are is really important, and how to dose people is really important. Aloe vera, slippery elm, oh my God, that's a slippery elm, the bark of a tree, slippery elm tree, is one of the most favourite things that I've worked with for over 20 years. I love it as a healing tool and supplement, and whilst it's a bit of a pain to dissolve, it's not very dissolvable. No. You can mix it with other things. You can mix it in stewed fruit or yogurt, or, there is certain solubility that it can come better in a good organic pear juice rather than water. But from a not only healing point of view long term, I have experienced it healing or feeling symptomatic relief in 20 minutes after taking it. That's anywhere in the gastrointestinal tract.
Yeah. It's interesting you bring those.
Strep?
It's interesting that you bring those up, because if I take a high dosage of glutamine, even now, it'll go straight through me. I can drink glutamine if I put it in water and I sip it throughout the day, like just gradually, it works. But if I take a high dosage, no good. And when I first was having leaky gut, the practitioner that I saw gave me slippery elk. And when I took that, same thing, it would just go straight through me. So that as a fiber just didn't work for me personally. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I think that obviously it works for some people, but I also think we've got to be careful about sometimes those supplements, because for me personally, I just found that they actually made it worse, not better. So it's interesting you bring up those two, because they're the two that were the enemy to me.
There are more, but let me just elaborate then on those. So I love that you brought that up, because that is true. Glutamine in high dosing, and a lot of things in high dosing, is not a great way to take them, because the body has, again, particularly when the body's in a state of inflammation, and the gastrointestinal tract is in this hyper inflamed state of reactivity. So having those things, as you say, sipping them, going slowly, being aware that of the person's place, what's their status right now, and how should we go forward and approach this, rather than what do they say, the one hammer for all the nails, you're just hitting it all the same.
Yeah.
So the slippery, the glutamine, definitely. The other thing that with glutamine, of course, is its impact on neurochemistry. So excitatory, so you've got to be careful of all of that stuff. So that's why, again, I think it's good to work with someone. The slippery elm is a prebiotic, and I find that sometimes it's, particularly sometimes with people with SIGO, it's not a good combo. So if someone's got gut transit time that's fast, and or being triggered to be fast in the state of inflammation that they're at, absolutely got to really go low, go slow.
Yeah.
And do it very gradually and build it up slowly. Other sorts of products, aloe vera can be soothing for some people. Zinc carnosine, specifically carnosine is one of the things that I love for healing. Vitamin A, vitamin D, we've got anti-inflammatory herbs in our dispensary, so things like turmeric and boswellia, those can also be. But it really comes back to saying, what else is happening in there, though? It's not just about the leaky gut story. Has the person got large bowel dysbiosis? Is their microbiome being assessed? And I'm probably inclined to investigate those sort of things before I even got to the state of doing intestinal permeability. Like you said, food sensitivity, microbiome. What's the microbiome doing? What's the story of it? What's happening with the small intestine?
Yeah.
And the microbiome testing is great because we get information about some of the other, like pancreatic elastase markers and pH of the environment. Those sorts of extra digestive functional markers are really great that we get that as part of the microbiome assessment.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Yeah, for me personally, it was like, I think I had to remove a lot of foods. Like it was the food sensitivity stuff and me just being aware of how food made me feel. Not that I had a bad diet, but like I said, I was just trying to figure out the foods that I could eat. Bone broth, like getting good quality bone broth, homemade bone broth in. Obviously, it's got a lot of great nutrients, such as glutamine's in there. So that was helping. And colostrum, I found that taking some colostrum was a really good thing that helped heal my gut. And when I got on that, I just started to feel just so much better. Like my sleep improved, my energy improved, brain fog went away. And that's really what changed it. But I realized that, I had to manage, not only that, I had to manage my training. Like training had to change drastically. Like the volume of training and exercise I was doing just had to cut back. Even just like doing flexibility and stretching and just being more, parasympathetic nervous system instead of high intensity, go, lift heavy weights, sprint, run, jump, all that sort of stuff. Like that just had to go on the back burner, not forever, but just for the period of time where I was healing my gut. And then once, my gut felt better and once things were working better, the plumbing was working better, it was about just reintroducing that training slowly and building back up to the level where I knew I could be. And, for years now, I've been able to get back into training and do the stuff that I love. But there was a big period there where I just had to take a big break and just change my lifestyles, change my habits to make sure I was taking care of my gut and just not consistently adding all that stress that it just couldn't deal with. So yeah, I think it's important that we have to address that because so many people want to come in and go, what's the pill? What's the supplement? What can I do to fix this? But if you don't address, like you say, the underlying cause, well, what got you here in the first place? Well, then you're just constantly picking the scab off, aren't you? And it's just never going to heal if you don't address those underlying issues.
That's a great analogy. Yeah. Like if you've got a wound and you keep picking it off, it's just not going to heal very well, is it? Yeah, I think, and for some people, depending on where they're at, their sensitivity might be so bad that they can't do anything. It's like you say. I mean, it is so individual, and that's why I love working in functional medicine because we do treat every single person differently, not with the same hammer.
Yeah. It's a good thing to point out though too. I think it's like because it's so individual, like you might get someone that comes in and you might go, okay, well this protocol has worked before. Let's try it. And you give them glutamine and you give them cypriol and you give them this stuff and they're trying to change their lifestyle and it just doesn't work. But I think it's that you've got to be willing to experiment because it's not the same solution for everybody. And you might go down one path and hit that brick wall. Well, that just didn't work. And that's what happened to me. But I didn't give up. I was like, well, I have to try something else. What else is there that I can try? What's the next thing? And obviously still looking at lifestyle, but okay, well, colostrum, well, did that work? Okay, that worked for me. I think you've just got to be willing to keep exploring and not give up because it's not a simple one size fits all, is it? The fix can be difficult.
Point. It's such a great point. And I think it is great for people because people can get pretty disheartened and pretty early on, especially depending on how long they've been unwell. They can, depending on how long it's been, they can get impatient and frustrated. And it's hard. It's hard to stay motivated if you're feeling like you're really doing everything and nothing's improving. To maintain that motivation is really hard. It's easy to get motivated if it's all feeling much better.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
For you, I think that's great that you have that mindset that this is a journey to use a better word, that it does take time. And there used to be not scientifically placebo crossover blind trialed, but there was a suggestion that for every year that we've had some illness or unwellness in our health, it can be at least 2 months of healing.
Yeah.
So if someone comes forward with 10 years of not feeling flash, even 5 years, looking at a year.
Yeah.
And nobody kind of thinks of that because we've all been a little bit wired in taking Panadol and feeling better 20 minutes later. We're used to being very quickly resolved.
Yeah.
And it's a hard concept to get your head around if it's not something. If we said to people in the beginning, we reckon it'll take a year for you to start to feel better, we walk straight out the door. Like, God, why would I pay you to do that?
Yeah.
So I think but there is truth in that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the whole thing. We work with health coaches, and for me, they are the absolute gem of the whole story here. The health coaches, as soon as there's any kind of thing in that realm, I just go, you need to talk to the health coach about that. They are best at helping people and supporting people with those mindsets.
Yeah, exactly. It's putting it in perspective. Like, okay, if they've been sick for that time and it's going to take a year to heal, and they're not willing to do that. So it's like, well, the longer you put this off, the longer it's going to take you to heal. And if you're feeling this way now, let's say in your 30s and 40s, let's fast forward 10 years, 15 years from now. If we don't address this now, like, what's going to be the consequences then? And how are you going to be feeling then? I know it's uncomfortable. I know it's challenging right now, but what's it going to be like in 10 or 15 years from now?
And
I
if
think
not
when
now, when?
if not now, when? And if people vision that in the future and go, oh, actually, then now might be the time I better act, because if things keep going south from where I am right now, it's not going to be a comfortable lifestyle that I'm going to have in my later years. Just on the recovery thing, like in your experience, are you saying that if I've got leaky gut, it could take a long time for me to heal? Or what do you feel is sort of like the window of people seeing improvements in their health if they start doing the right things, changing their lifestyle, potentially taking some supplements and trying to heal their leaky gut?
I guess, again, it depends on the gravity of the symptom picture when they arrive and where they're at. I do think that they can see changes within a month in regards to, if it's joint pain or headaches and things like that. But again, it's also about how much they dive in. Yes. And you can't just rely on supplements to be the answer to this. That's, they're great, and I'm rapt that that's the dispensary that I have. But I know that they won't do the job of their own. So it really is about the whole package and what people are ready for and up for. And if they're doing it in a state that is, I guess, again, this is the whole lifestyle challenge, is not getting them stressed about the actions that they're taking, because then you've made it worse because someone's so uptight about what they're eating and what they shouldn't be eating and what they're, and I should be in bed by 10 o'clock and I can't get to bed before midnight and all those things. Yeah. So being able to just hold them in the space through that, and, and we do pride ourselves on being able to do that and be available for people and support them through their healing stuff. Then I think you could certainly start to feel some differences even as soon as a month.
Yeah,
I mean, people I've had have, and we can talk about a couple of examples if you want to. Within 2 weeks, I've seen someone come back and looked at them and thought, oh, God, are you the same person I saw 2 weeks ago? I mean, that's the power of food for me. That's and more than the supplements, actually, because what I was asked when I joined this clinic, what's one of the things that you found the most surprising in your years of practice? And I said, probably the most that I found is how much people's diets are making them sick, and that people don't credit that, and how much changing it can make them so much weller.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we're talking about it like it's a no-brainer and it's obvious, but it's not for everybody. And in fact, it's astounding to me that how many people have just never had the opportunity to be informed, to find out, to even step back and have a look at what they're eating and think about that in regards to what's contributing to the way they feel. And it's where it begins and ends, really. It starts with that.
So important, just such a big overlooked part of our health, I think, and just in our society is just coming back to diet and how incredible food can actually make us feel, look and perform if we get it right. And the opposite is true if we get it wrong. So I love that you bring that up. I think maybe just to finish on, you have talked about a little bit about client journeys and client stories. I'm just curious, like maybe if you've got a story there about maybe the transformation that you've seen. So someone coming in and you doing testing and looking at leaky gut, like how are they feeling? What's going on for them? And then after they go through maybe lifestyle changes, supplementation, like what's that transformation? How are they coming out on the other side?
It's the whole dopamine juice for me when I do this job. That's when I see this happen. So the one that comes to mind at the moment is a man in his 60s. And when he came to see me in the beginning, he had a binder of all of his medical history, pathology results, things like that, his journey over the last decade or more. He had a long list of things that he had as concerns and issues with his health. He also had a bit of a list of pharmaceuticals that he's on. And so I said, all right, well, we'll just try and do this piece by piece, like the way you eat an elephant. Just let's unpack it slowly. So we started with some testing, of course, some functional medicine testing. And there were a few things that came up. SIBO was one of them. And we started to then go into the journey of treatment protocol. So dietary modification, a little bit of supplementation. This man is, I think, 4 months down the track now since I've been working with him. And he said to me in one of our recent appointments, I bet you thought I was for the rubbish heap when you first met me. And I said, I would never think that. But he's now in a place where he needs to review his hypertensive medication and have it reduced in dose because his blood pressure has come down so much. He's lost weight. He's slimmer than he has been since he was a young man. His energy levels, he does an incredible amount of lovely volunteer work, and that includes a lot of physical gardening, landscaping things, mowing lawns, and he's got the people that he does that for knocking on the window from their kitchen going, are you all right out there? You haven't stopped for a minute. He said, I've got energy and he was struggling stepping over things when his balance was off. He's now out there working in 30-degree heat mowing lawns for 3 hours. He had a chronic cough that's disappeared. He's had, poor sleep, energy levels. And really the dominant feature, of course, he's been very lovely and compliant with supplements and so on, because that would be his personality. I knew that from the minute I met him. I thought, I'm going to love working with you. But really the big shift for him is his food. And I said to him recently, do you think you'll ever change that? He said, I will never eat the way that I used to eat now. There is no going back. And, that's just like, wow. And that was 4 months.
Beautiful. Yeah. Such a powerful transformation in such a short period of time. But it's when the penny drops like that, when clients see that how their food affects them and how that, taking some supplements and doing all the right things can just transform their life. Like I was living in hell. That was so painful. And then where I am now is so much better. Why would I ever go back to that? I think that's sort of what we touched on before at the start, wasn't it? It's like the pain of being where I am is more uncomfortable than making the change. That I'm going to step into that and make that change. And then the result that I get from that just teaches me so much. I think more and more people need to be looking at their diet and thinking about the longevity and that big vision of who they want to become and where they want their health to be when they're older. Because it starts as soon as you start to make changes and such big impacts.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. And you can do it. We can do it in bite sizes with the person. They don't, I'm sure you do this too, you just find out, well, if we were going to say that you have to do this, this, and this, which one would you pick? And let them choose where they can manage it, because we don't want to set people up to fail. No. So it's very collaborative, and that's the way I think we love to work with.
Yes, small steps is the key, and just bringing it into our lifestyle step by step and making it sustainable, because like you say, overwhelming ourselves with 100 different things, it just becomes too daunting, adds more stress than we need to. And generally it doesn't last. Like we might have that motivation for 1 or 2 weeks to exercise and eat well and get to bed early. But if we can't make it sustainable and we can't bring it into our lifestyle, well, then it's going to be very short-lived, which is obviously not what we want. Lorraine, I'm truly grateful for your time today, and thank you for jumping on and sharing all that lovely information about our gut health. If people want to reach out and get in touch with you, how can they find you?
So I'm at most of the week at Melbourne Functional Medicine. We are in South Melbourne. We're a functional medicine integrative clinic, and love to see you. We have, we can send you a link. But if somebody just Googled Melbourne Functional Medicine, they will find us. Our website is mfm.au. And we've got a team of people here that we're just waiting for you to walk through the door.
Beautiful, excellent. Yeah, I'll put the link in the blog post as well. Do you use social media at all, or if that's not your thing?
The MFM does, definitely. So Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, we're all there.
I'll throw some links up there too.
In all of that as well.
Wicked. Cheers, Lorraine. Thank you very much for your time. Very insightful and greatly appreciated. All right, that's a wrap for today's episode of the Midlife Mavericks podcast. If this episode hit home for you, don't just sit on it. Take action. If you're a man in midlife looking to regain your strength, energy, and purpose, check out the Midlife Mavericks membership, a community of high-performing men committed to leveling up their health and lifestyle. No fluff, no excuses, just results. Start by taking the Midlife Assessment Scorecard, a quick tool to help you identify the key areas holding you back and what to do about it. Because if you don't track it, you can't improve it. Head to midlife-mavericks.com.au to take the scorecard and learn more about the Midlife Mavericks membership. If this episode helped you, share it with a friend. Iron sharpens iron. Let's build stronger men together. Until next time, take ownership, take action, and keep pushing forward.